I've been out of power all night, so this is actually nice. That's right. No. LCRA, they're out of power. I think so, yeah.
How's the weather there?
We were still out of power when I left.
You're working home?
Yesterday. I know. We gave them well, crowd is one of
That's history.
I told him he's now dead. 46 years. We had two guys. See all of them. We
Throwing the flat. Tore down?
call my mom.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll convene the meeting. I show it's 9:32, February 2nd. This is the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group meeting. This is a hybrid meeting that is in person and virtually. And because of that, we are recording the virtual component of the meeting, correct? If we could, let's begin with a roll call and confirmation we have quorum present.
Yes, sir. Tim Andrews.
Present.
Thank you. John Byram. Kurt Campbell.
Present.
Thank you. Will Conley. Debbie Farmer.
Here.
Thank you. Charlie Flatten. Steve Graham.
Here.
Thank you. Terrell Graham.
This is Annalisa. I'll be stepping in as his proxy.
Thank you. Vic Hildebrand. Thomas Youngman. Russell Labus.
Here.
Thank you. Glenn Lord.
Here.
Scooter Mangold.
Here.
Daniel Meyer. Gary Middleton. Travis Pruski.
Here.
Thank you. Robert Puente.
Here.
Thank you. Vanessa Pugh Williams. Humberto Ramos.
Present.
Thank you. Weldon Riggs.
Here.
Roland Ruiz. Larry Bartek for Savage. Darren Simmons, Mitchell Sowards, Jonathan Stinson,
Here.
Thomas Taggart,
Here.
thank you, Ian Taylor, Diane Wasenick, Adam Yablonsky,
I'm here.
thank you, Dan Yoxel,
Here.
thank you, Marty Kelly,
Here.
Rusty Ray, Ronald Fiesler, Ileana Delgado, Don McGee, Elizabeth McCoy,
Here.
Charles Wiedenfeld, Jamie McCool,
Here.
Carl Kroll. We have a quorum.
This is Diane Wasenick, and I just joined as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll move to agenda item 2, receive public comment. Are there any cards? Public comment? Is there anyone in the room or online that would like to offer public comment at this time? Okay. Let's move to agenda item 3, which is the approval of minutes of the previous meeting. Planning group. Those minutes were sent out to the members prior to the meeting. There are motions to adopt the minutes of the meeting of the planning group for, held on November 3rd, 2022 by consensus.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any opposition to passing the motion? There being none, the motion passes. I'd like to move agenda items 7 and 8 up in our order here. We'll deal with those next, unless there's any issue with doing so. Agenda item 7 is discussion and appropriate action regarding the filling of vacancies on the planning group for the water utilities interest group area and the electric generating facilities area. We've been fortunate to receive nominations for those vacancies on our planning group. We have a nomination that has been submitted for the electric generating interest area, single nomination, I should say. This was the nomination of Mr. Bale. I believe all the members have received, at least forwarded to them, a copy of the nomination package for all of the individuals we're going to discuss here in a moment. As our past practice over the past couple of years, when there isn't a multiple nominations for a single interest group, we've foregone the usual interview process, and that was the case with Mr. Bale. Prior to the meeting, I contacted Mr. Bale to discuss his willingness to serve on this planning group. It was an excellent conversation. I'm certain all of you read the packet material. Mr. Bale is certainly qualified. I think he'll be an asset to the group. In my conversation with Mr. Bale, I asked that he be present. We talked yesterday, I believe it was. Of course, he wasn't going to attend in person, but virtually. I hope Mr. Bale's online. Okay, giving a thumbs up, he's online. With all the nominees, we encourage them to attend, so to speak, the meetings, to afford them the opportunity to introduce themselves to the planning group member, make themselves available to the planning group member should you have questions or want to discuss, I suppose, their qualifications and experience for serving. And then want them to attend so that if the group sees fit, place them on the board, they can start their service immediately. Is there any discussion regarding Mr. Bell's nomination for the electrical generating interest? I'd like to parse this up into two actions. Is there a motion to elect Mr. Bell to the planning group to serve the interest area which is nominated? We have a motion. Is there a second? Second. We have a second. Is there any additional discussion regarding that motion? And if not, is there any opposition to the motion? Nothing online, is there? There being no opposition, that motion passes by consensus. Mr. Bell, hope you can hear us and can respond. We now consider you to be part of the planning group. If you have a camera and would like to make any comments, this would be an opportune time to do so.
Yes, thanks, Tim. I am present virtually. I apologize. I had every intention of being there in person for the meeting today. However, the weather here in Texas decided to make that a little challenging. Did not feel like risking my life to get to San Antonio with the roads. We've had a pretty decent little ice storm up here in the Dallas area, but I want to extend my appreciation to the group for considering me for this voting member position. Looking forward to working with you all. You have assets in the area, and so water conservation, water planning is of great importance to us as a company, and really look forward to working with you all. If anybody has any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer anything. If not,
Thank you, Mr. Bell. We appreciate you participating online. Look forward to meeting you in person at future meetings. But at this point, please consider yourself on the group as a voting member, and as actions come up, vote and participate as you see fit.
thank you.
You're welcome. Regarding the second interest area, water utilities, should explain for the planning group's benefit that the executive committee met on the 30th to review and discuss those nominations. During the meeting, the committee interviewed the nominees, Mr. Wright and Mr. McBride. We had good interviews. In my estimation, both nominees would be serve this group well. But in this case, we have one vacancy and 2 nominations. And as required by the bylaws, the committee considered those nominations. I should say the executive committee considered those nominations and came to a consensus to nominate Mr. McBride to fill the vacancy. I contacted Mr. McBride and Mr. Wright directly to inform them of our intention to make that recommendation, so they're aware of that. And with both of those individuals, we encourage them to participate in this meeting and future meetings, because as most of you know, vacancies come up from time to time, and we've seen in the past where individuals that were nominated at one point but not recommended, not seated, ultimately filled vacancies in the future. So we've encouraged both nominees to be here at the meeting and to participate in future meetings. Mr. McBride is present in person for the same purpose, to avail himself to this committee for discussion. And then after any discussion, if there's a motion to fill the vacancy with one of those nominees, we'll take up that motion. Mr. McBride, did you want to introduce yourself or make any comments?
Certainly. Good morning. My name is Andrew McBride. As I mentioned, you're in the executive committee. I've been in the business about 25 years, working with San Antonio Water System, City of Arlington, and now I'm with SSLGC. We are a regional player, obviously, from the water mayor's standpoint. And so I look forward to an opportunity to work with a group and with a number of individuals individually as we look to solve for needs of this region. Thanks a lot.
Any discussion regarding the matter? There being none, is there a motion to fill the vacancy?
So moved.
And your motion is to fill the vacancy, Mr. McBride? Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any opposition to the motion? There being none, the motion passes by consensus. We'll move to agenda item 8. Oh, yes, excuse me, Mr. McBride, would, please join us at the table. There's a packet at the table for your use. Okay. Agenda item 8, election of officers for the 2023 Executive Committee Planning Group. We're required under bylaws to elect and re-elect officers every first meeting of the year. This being the first meeting of the year, this is the time for us to do so. The Executive Committee is made up of 5 members, 3 of which serve as officers of that committee, being chair, vice chair, treasurer. Presently, I serve as your chair. Mr. Yablonsky serves as vice chair, I believe, and Gary's secretary. No, we don't have Gary. That's it. Excuse me, I misspoke. Not Gary. Different organization. Oh, excuse me. Right on the screen. Everyone saw it for me. So that's your membership of the executive committee and the officers. Is there any discussion on the matter? In particular, is there anyone that's interested in serving or have an interest in serving in any of those positions or those officers?
Yeah, Tim, this is Glenn Lord. I think that it would be best if I step down at this point, given where I'm going in my career and an ability to serve reasonably well for this role. So I'm going to offer my resignation from this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. Appreciate you letting us know. We'll make a solicitation for nominations for that vacancy as we have in the past. So suffice it to say, Mr. Lord, you don't want to serve as chair then? Okay, that's right. Okay, so is there any additional discussion regarding the matter? And if not, is there a motion regarding the officers reaching out?
We can take a nomination at this time to fill that seat on executive committee.
Oh, that's right. Just not the vacancy.
Well, Mr. Lord, I want to clarify, you are stepping down from your position as an at-large member of executive committee and not a member of the planning group.
No, I would remain as part of the planning group. It's just the serving in the executive committee.
Very good.
Thank you,
Or
sir.
I misunderstood you, sir. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry. I wasn't clear.
I'm willing to serve at large. I'm not saying someone else could, but I'm willing to do that if that helps in the process.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Are there, so let's deal with the vacancy now for the at-large position. Are there any other members that wish to serve, or is there anyone that wants to nominate another member to serve on the executive committee under the vacant at-large position vacated by Mr. Moore, other than Mr. Gray? Okay.
Steve need to be nominated, or?
Yeah, why don't we just go through the process of.
I'll move to nominate Steve for the vacancy
Opposed?
And I'll second it.
Very good. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If no discussion, is there any opposition to the motion? Okay, there being no opposition, motion passes by consensus. Mr. Graham, welcome to the executive. Now let's deal with the officer positions.
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick. I could not hear who was nominated and who we were voting on, so could you tell us who was elected?
Yes, Steve Graham was elected, nominated, voted on, and elected.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, officer positions. Any discussion, recommendations? I will not do so.
I make a nomination to nominate that slate, amended to Steve Graham.
So, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If no discussion, any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes by consensus. You have your slate of officers and executives.
Could you please repeat who is on the slate? Is it the people who already were plus Mr. Graham?
Yes, Diane, the nomination was to re-elect the officers as they are displayed on the, I don't know if you can see the screen or not. With the amendment that the at-large position listed on the screen is no longer filled by Mr. Lord, now filled by Mr. Graham.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say I can hear you clearly, but frequently when there are motions, I cannot hear that. Thank you.
Very good. I'll try to repeat the motions for you.
For survey.
Okay. With that, we'll move back to agenda item 4, status reports and communications from Texas Water Development Board. Ms. McCoy is going to make a presentation.
Hi, good morning. This is Elizabeth McCoy from the Texas Water Development Board, and I just have a few updates for you today. And if I could get the next slide, please. Thank you. Awesome. So last month, we sent out some supporting data for Task 4B, which is the task to identify infeasible strategies and projects. What we sent out included some spreadsheets with strategy and project information from the 2021 regional water plans. We've also since provided some additional clarification that the infeasibility review is not required for strategies or projects that don't require a permit or involve construction. So for this task, at a minimum, the planning groups will need to review the status of recommended strategies and projects that require a permit or involve construction and have an online decade of 2020 in the 2021 regional water plans. Planning groups are also encouraged to review additional near-term strategies or projects that may have lengthy permitting or construction processes. And then just as a reminder, the results of this analysis will need to be presented at a public meeting and also be included in the technical memorandum, which is due in March of 2024. The Interregional Planning Council has scheduled their next meeting for March 9th. It's going to be held in Austin at the TWDB offices, but there will also be a virtual option for attendance as well. The meeting information will be posted on the council's webpage, so keep an eye out for that. Keep an eye out on that for more information. And then we have some new educational materials available online, including a one-pager on water supply and flood mitigation strategies, the drought of record, and consistency waivers for TWDB funding. So I'd invite you to take a look at these new materials that are available. And of course, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or need any additional information. And then lastly, I'll just mention that the draft population and municipal demands for the 2026 regional water plans have been released. And we have Katie Dahlberg, who is the TWDB manager of the projections and socioeconomic analysis team. She's here today virtually and will be presenting on the population and municipal demand methodology later on in the agenda. But that's all the updates that I have for you today. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate the presentation. With that, we'll move to agenda item 5, staff report and communications related to regional water planning, including reports by chair, regional liaisons, groundwater management area representatives, and members of the planning group. I won't, as usual, there's so much overlap between some of these reports. I'll try to keep it brief. I did want to bring to everyone's attention a study that was, it's not so recent, I think it was May of last year, was delivered by TWDB regarding the aquifer storage and recovery report for the Breezo-Wilcox Aquifer characterization for eastern Gonzales and parts of Caldwell, Washington County. That's related to a strategy we have in the past plan in this plan, etc. Those of you interested in that topic, you can find a web page and a series of other documents dedicated to that study. So I encourage you to seek that out if you're interested in that. As discussed a moment ago, the Interregional Planning Council is holding a meeting. We held a meeting on November 9th. It was the initial meeting, organizational in nature, I described it. We do have the next meeting scheduled for March 9th. Keep in mind that committee is intended to improve interregional coordination and collaboration, try to deal with issues, and between regions have the responsibility to develop a report and have to do so in a fairly short time period. We'll be working on that. Vincent and I serve on that committee, and should you have questions, feel free to reach out to us regarding that. My final comment, I suppose, is to the regional liaison. Just a reminder, it falls under this big umbrella of interregional coordination. We have a responsibility to look at these infeasible water management strategies, and to the extent it could affect other regional water planning groups, liaisons may want to begin their direct engagement with the other regional planning group that they're serving to see if there are any strategies in their areas that need to be discussed with this group or vice versa. So liaisons, I think it's time to engage in that way. That's all I have to report. Are there any reports from liaisons to other planning groups? Okay, there being none, are there any reports from GMA representatives? Are any reports from member planning groups?
Well, no, but before you leave this.
Well, you're about to leave, so.
Okay.
Yes.
If I may just introduce Linda Venus. She is our new director of water resources. She's the new and improved Karen Thompson. Linda is a licensed engineer. She's been at Solace 25 years. She was a big part of the distribution project. The best thing about her is that we went to the same high school. I was a freshman and she was a senior at the time. And so, big welcome.
Joining us, we look forward to you participating in. Welcome. Any other?
Tim?
Just a moment, Diane.
Okay.
Steve will make a few comments and then we'll come to you.
Okay.
Good morning, planning group members. I was asked by our conservation team to promote the 2023 Central Texas Water Conservation Symposium because it's in San Antonio this year. And that is going to be held Wednesday, February 22nd from 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. at the San Antonio Botanical Garden. I sent Kai the link to sign up and with the agenda. So Kai will be kind enough to send that to all the planning group members after the meeting or during the meeting. And then on the next day, on Thursday, February 23rd, SAWS is offering a rain to drain tour. And I just checked this morning and there are seats still available if you are interested. And how to assess that will also be available on the link when Kai sends that out. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Diane, did you want to make comments?
I have been attending the Region K meetings, and though this project is not one that overlaps with our region, it overlaps with the region on the other side of Region K, and it got a lot of attention at the last meeting, and I thought you all might just be interested in this and might want to follow what's going on, because it appears to me it's going to set a lot of precedents if this particular project moves forward. And the way we learned about it at Region K was a Liberty Hill engineer came from the city of Liberty Hill, and I don't know if he was a consultant or a member of city staff. He came and asked for not an amendment, but a waiver so that you would consider his project to be in the previous plan. And the TWD representative there had to explain what that meant because they had never heard of a waiver before instead of an amendment. So they allowed him to stand up and explain what he wanted to do. And he started out by saying they had this pond and they wanted to take water from it. And with much long questioning, many other details came out about this pond. It turns out it was a gravel pit that first we thought was spring fed, but then we found out there was a ditch from another spring bringing water to it, and they didn't know what layers of what aquifers were feeding this pit, but it was also capturing rainfall and surface runoff. And then it turned out an aggregate company and another city, Bertram, were also planning on taking water from this pit to meet their needs. And the thing got more and more complicated. I can't remember if I mentioned that further down the road we found out it was 100 feet deep. So this project I'm now hearing bits and pieces about because of the Bertram permits that went to their groundwater district. Anyway, it's a very odd case with many different parts of water law that are going to be involved in it because it's groundwater, surface water, and so on, you know, modified ditches that lead to it, and how you divide it up among three people and how three entities, and how you, you know, in general, figure out pumping tests and so on and so forth. So I just thought I'd mention it to y'all. It's I'm hearing about it from multiple sources now that I went to the Region K meeting and heard the first explanation of it. And, you know, Region K is different than our region. They have different problems and different issues, but some things overlap. So I'm keeping an eye on that one.
Thank you, Dan. Any other reports or comments by membership? Okay, if there being none, we'll move to agenda item 6. This is presentation by San Antonio River Authority on the state legislative session. Mr. Massey, ready to make a presentation?
Good morning. Thank you very much. There are a number of people in this room that can deliver this presentation just as well as I can, if not better, so bear with me. How do I advance? Good.
Oh, it's up there, it's just not here.
We'll do it for you.
Go ahead.
While he's doing that, I should mention that they turned down the waiver at Region K.
Thank you.
No, but I need to be able to transfer that. Cool. That's good. So the legislature, as you all heard and read, has surplus of approximately 32 to 33 billion dollars. The governor has come out earlier and he'd like to see half of that spent on property tax relief. But the comptroller, the lieutenant governor, and Speaker Phelan would like to see some of that spent on one-time infrastructure needs, including water infrastructure. Also layered into that, last week, Chairman Perry of the Senate Ag, Water, Rural Affairs Committee mentioned that he wants to file a bill for $3 billion to go towards water infrastructure needs. So there's a lot of money available this session. Makes it very difficult for all the elected officials because everybody has their hand out. But water is certainly part of that conversation, and we should anticipate funding for water infrastructure, including water resource needs, potentially flood infrastructure fund, wastewater treatment plants, all of that wrapped into a bill, approximately $3 billion, what Chairman Perry said last week. And next slide, please. The Lieutenant Governor recently released, named the committees for the Senate, and these are the members of the Senate Ag, Water, Rural Affairs Committee. Of note here, we have Roland Gutierrez of our planning basin, Lois Colkhorst, Pete Flores. All of those members are within this region, and good people to speak with any of your needs moving forward. The House committees have not been set yet. Their preferences from the members were due on the 26th of this month. So we anticipate the Speaker Phelan naming those committees within the next week and a half or so. And then the legislature will get down to work. Next slide, please. As you're aware, there's been a House Water Caucus named, or people have signed up for. The Texas Water Foundation has taken the lead with this. Chairman Tracy King is the chair of the Water Caucus. The other members that I have on the screen are members that are within our planning basin, our planning area. There are another 34 members of the Water Caucus as well that I don't have all up on the screen. Having spoken with a couple members last week, and understand that freshman Mark DeRazio would like to be part of the Water Caucus as well. So if they start accepting new members, or when they start releasing more members, look for his name on the list as well. Next slide, please. So as of a couple days ago, we had a little over 2,500 bills filed. We use a variety of resources to track these, as I'm sure most of you all do. Work with TWCA, we work with local entities like SAWS, GBRA a bit, and then we have our own consultants that help us. I wish I could say I was up to date through this morning, but I'm not, but we're pretty close. Next slide, please. So I want to highlight just these three bills. We have these on our priority track. Senate Bill 156 is the Groundwater Conservation District bill that Chairman Perry has filed the last two sessions. The major change here is on the attorney's fees. He striked shall, and it is now may provide attorney fees. Don't know if that will stick. I've heard him speak over the last year and a half several times where he was adamant that he would not change that provision. But for right now it is. Chairman Perry has also filed Senate Bill 296, which would update the water availability models for the Guadalupe San Antonio Water Basin, as well as Nueces, Lavaca, San Jacinto, and Trinity. That bill will come with a fiscal note. I believe it's in the $6 to $7 million range. So not a big ticket item, but I think it's very important for this planning group to support moving forward. I believe our LAM is lacking the last 33 to 34 years of data. So, and lastly, Senate Bill 469, filed by Senator Springer, would clearly allow for some rural areas, small communities, to tap into Water Development Board funds for their water infrastructure needs. Community of 10,000 or less, or a county with 50,000 or less population is what that bill is driving at. Those are the three primary bills I'd like to bring to your attention. There are others that we're absolutely following, but I think these are the three most pressing for the region. I'm sure there are others that are out there that others are tracking as well. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer any.
Thank you. Can you go to the water fountain slide?
Yes, sir.
I do want to emphasize that the Texas Water Foundation was successful in helping to create this American sponsoring entity. And they've gotten 40, and I think it's growing as the membership is growing. And one thing unique about this is that it will not and should not advocate for certain bills, and probably not even certain ideas. It's policy driven, it's education driven, it's to get more members to understand the needs of water and water infrastructure. And so it's not rural based or urban based or anything like that. It's really truly an effort to educate the membership on what water is.
Thank you, Mr. Proctor.
Well, it's nice to see we're well organization. Chair. Is there any discussions or questions regarding the legislative session or the materials presented today to the planning group?
I have a question, Mr. Chairman. I kind of requested this be on the agenda. I guess my question is with regards to the planning group and some of these bills. We typically don't support bills, and typically, I guess, in Chapter 8, where we say we ask for some assistance from Water Development Board. So I just wanted us to be clear, or maybe some discussion as to what we've done in the past. We do have briefings. It helps everybody, educates everyone. But with regards to specific bills, that's not the purview of this planning group. It's just to support at the end stuff the Water Development Board. Is that correct? Am I correct in saying that? Correct.
Well, my understanding may be slightly different. I think you're right. We refer to it as Chapter 8. There's a section in the state water plan, regional water plan, where this group has outlined what I would describe as broad, say, policy considerations and encouragement for investigation by the legislature for their consideration in the legislative process. My recollection is there, time to time, I vaguely recall, Mr. Mims advocating maybe for stream segments being designated. Well, the designation was to advocate for their some forms of protections for certain segments of the stream. But other than that, I'm not aware of the group as a group taking an advocacy position or position of opposition.
So that's why I appreciate Sarah and Brian, the title is bills of note, not bills that are supporting or not supporting. And so as in particular would want to have a say-so in a lot of those bills that actually saw as so I do appreciate the way you titled that.
I think the intent would be that all of you be aware, and you can lobby and talk to your representative and senator as you see fit. You're not promoting any, but this is just awareness.
Thank you for the discussion. It's all around.
You're welcome.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ramos, Lindsay Elkins asked if someone could repeat the question, please. It's very hard to hear you, Mr. Ramos.
I'll try to I'll paraphrase your comment question. Mr. Ramos' question was dealing with what role, as I understood it, what role has Region L played in the past regarding legislative matters or water policy matters as it relates to the legislative sessions? That was the point of the discussion. Is that accurate? Very good. Any other questions or comments regarding this matter? I'll make one final comment. It may help. I think it follows up on Mr. Puente's comments. We have a very large group, many different interests represented, and views on policies represented by the membership here. Many of us have been involved in efforts to monitor and perhaps even influence legislation. That's a difficult thing to do, and I'm actually quite surprised we're able to do it in Chapter 8, as we have. It's taken some effort by many members to get that done in the past. I think it'd be a very difficult thing for us to come to consensus on any one particular issue and get involved in the legislative session. Okay, if there's no additional discussion on that matter, we'll move forward to, I guess it'd be agenda item 9. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a presentation by TWPG on population and municipal demand methodologies. Ms. Dahlberg is going to make that presentation. Is that correct?
Good morning. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Katie, would you share your presentation?
Yes, I will. Thank you. Okay. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for being understanding about letting me present virtually today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. My name is Katie Dahlberg. I'm the manager of the Projections and Socioeconomic Analysis Department, and I work with Elizabeth McCoy in the Water Supply Planning Division at the TWDB. Today I'm going to talk about the population and municipal water demand projections for the 2026 regional water plans. So first, I will cover the projections timeline. I'll briefly go over water user groups, and then I'll talk about population projections, gallons per capita per day, plumbing code savings projections, and the municipal demand projections. So municipal demand projections are made up of those other component parts, the population, gallons per capita per day, and plumbing code savings. So that will make up the bulk of today's presentation. So at this time, all non-municipal demand projections have been shared, and last week we shared the population and municipal water demand projections. And we are asking that regional water planning groups submit revision requests for non-municipal demand projections by July 14th, and then the very next month submit revision requests for the population and municipal demand projections by August 11th. These dates are being driven by our board date to adopt the projections, which will be in the fall of 2023, and that date is being driven by the March 4th, 2024 technical memorandum due date. So water user groups are defined in the Texas Administrative Code, and municipal water user groups, or WUGs, generally use 100 acre-feet or more. All WUGs from the 2021 regional water plans were carried over, and all new WUGs were evaluated based on that utility water use of 100 acre-feet criteria, and we looked at the years 2015 through 2019. The WUG list was shared last year, and regional water planning groups had the opportunity to review and revise and submitted those revisions in July of 2022, and that resulted in 144 municipal WUGs in Region L. The TWDB drafts population projections using county-level projections developed by the Texas Demographic Center, or TDC. TDC uses a cohort component method relying on birth rates, death rates, and migration rates for different demographic cohorts. In their latest projections, they used migration rates from 2010 to 2020, which are the two decennial census, and they produced two migration scenarios, the full migration, also known as the 1.0, and the half migration, also known as the 0.5. The TDC develops 30-year projections, and their county-level projections, along with their methodology document, are available online at this link. The TWDB has always relied on the initial TDC county-level projections. In the past, the TWDB altered the projections for the regional water plans in certain counties to hold them constant instead of showing declining population projections. For the 2026 regional water plans, the draft county population projections will follow the trends projected by the TDC, including declines. The TWDB projections are extended through 2080, so we extended 2070 and 2080 to meet the 50-year planning horizon that we use in regional water planning. And the TWDB, my staff, we drafted the WUG projections using the full migration scenario. However, we provided both the full migration and the half migration scenarios by region and county to the planning groups for your consideration. So in order to project the population by WUG, we first have to know the historical WUG population. One thing to note when we're talking about population by WUG, this is a permanent resident population, so no transient population, no tourist population. But when we get to GPCD, we'll see how that covers all municipal water use. So I'll get back to that in just a minute. So to first determine the WUG's historical population, my staff developed 2010 and 2020 populations by WUG using census block data. So we overlaid the WUG's boundary on top of this census block layer that we got from the US Census Bureau, and then we can count the number of people in each WUG. So here on the slide, I have an example. This is Yorktown WUG. You can see the WUG's boundary in the blue line, and then the black line with the numbers, that represents the census blocks. So we overlay that WUG boundary, and then we just count the number of people in each WUG boundary. We can do this when we have census block data, which is only during decennial census, so 2010 and 2020. We do estimate the in-between years, 2011 through 2019, although we did not use those particular years to develop population projections, but those years are especially helpful in reviewing historical GPCDs. So at this point in the process, we have historical and projected county population, and we have historical WUG population. So now we need to develop WUG population projections. So to sub-allocate the population projections from the county to the WUG, we reviewed the WUG's share of the region county growth rate, looking at that 2010 to 2020 rate of change. We also reviewed the WUG's share of the 2020 population, of the region county's total population. Some WUGs we hold constant through the planning horizon, things like group quarter WUGs, like military bases, universities. These just aren't going to grow at the same rate as a residential WUG. So we either hold them constant or have them growing at a much slower rate, just because they traditionally and historically will grow at a different rate than other WUGs. And then we also looked at, in the 2021 regional water plans, if a WUG or a planning group indicated that a WUG had no more room for growth, maybe it's like a subdivision and it has hit build out, will not continue to grow, we carried over that request at or near the build out population that was indicated in the 2021 regional water plans. The TWTB, my staff, we drafted WUG projections using the full migration scenario. However, we provided both the full migration and the half migration scenarios by region and county. And so you have the option to review that and potentially revise WUG projections to use the half migration scenario instead. And on this chart, this shows the historical population and then the projected population with that 1.0 migration scenario. So the two dark lines are 2010 and 2020. Those are the two decennial census. The green lines, 2011 through 2019, are the Census Bureau's population estimates. And then 2030 through 2080 is the draft projections. So in 2020, we're looking at about 3 million people in Regional. 2030, 3.5 million. By 2050, we're projecting 4.7 million, and by 2080, 7.1 million. And this slide was just for you all to kind of see the differences in counties. I'm sure you're all well aware that Bexar County is the largest county in Regional. So that all covered population. The other two component parts to municipal demand projections are the baseline GPCD and the projected plumbing code savings. So kind of moving towards the water aspect of municipal demand projections now. So GPCD stands for gallons per capita per day. We try to plan for a dry year using historical data. Municipal water use includes all utility water use. So this is that permanent residential population. And it's also commercial, institutional, and light industrial. So heavy manufacturing is taken out, and that's considered in the manufacturing water use category. Institutional is considered, as long as it's not its own WUG, then it's part of another WUG. But either way, it's municipal water use. And then commercial, of course, is all business offices, restaurants, hotels, all the other water use going on in a utility, in addition to that residential water use. For water user groups, we collect the municipal water use through our online our TWDB water use survey that we administer every year. And the sources in this category include groundwater and surface water. So for we use one baseline GPCD to project the future municipal demand projections. For WUGs in the 2021 regional water plans, we drafted their baseline GPCD by carrying over the baseline from the last plan and then estimating passive water savings that has occurred since the last planning cycle. This is to account for passive savings between that historical GPCD and the first projected decade of 2030. All new WUGs, they weren't in the last plan, so we wouldn't have a previous baseline GPCD for them. So we carried over, we drafted their baseline GPCD using 2018 water use. If they didn't have 2018 water use, then we used 2019. We provided all WUG's historical GPCD 2010 through 2020. So if you want to review those and revise using a different historical year, you're welcome to do that. And this slide is just showing an example of how I drafted those baseline GPCDs. So we assumed that the last plan's baseline GPCD roughly represented 2011. And then we took the plumbing code savings from the last plan and annualized it, and then removed, roughly 8 to 9 GPCD to create the new baseline GPCD. So the last part of the municipal demand projections are the plumbing code savings projections. So plumbing codes are state and federal laws that mandate the water efficiency of appliances and fixtures. The TWDB updated the plumbing code savings projections this planning cycle. So for residential, we are including toilets, shower heads, and clothes washers. And then for the first time ever, my staff drafted commercial water efficiency savings, looking at commercial toilet and urinal passive savings over time. And then we project these 2030 through 2080. And so this is the formula that we use to project municipal demand projections. For a given decade, we take the population projections and multiply it times that baseline GPCD minus the projected plumbing code savings of that decade times 365 and convert it to acre feet. And this chart is showing the historical 2010 through 2020 water use, municipal water use in Region L, and then the demand projections from the 2021 regional water plans in the solid red line, and the dotted green line is the draft projections of for this upcoming planning cycle that you guys are reviewing. And then just looking at 2030 by county, those draft water demand projections. And that is my last slide. Are there any questions?
Okay, could you go back a couple of slides where you show that last graph, that graph? You confirm for me my understanding, the black line represents actual numbers?
Correct. It's collected through our water use survey.
And then the orange and green line, one being from the previous plan, the other one to be used for this plan. The green being the projections. So the starting point for the new projections in 2030 is below the existing demand 2020.
Yeah, just slightly lower than 2030, and again slightly lower in 2040, and then it surpasses in 2050 and the remaining decades.
So would you attribute that to these water savings that you factored into the future projections? Would that be a reasonable explanation for that?
It is, that is definitely one reason. The baseline GPCD would be another reason. And then, of course, the population projections as well.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Mr. Taggart has a question.
Mr. Taggart, you have a question?
I just had one question in relation to the extrapolation of the 2 decades, beyond the, work that had been done by the demographer. Was that extrapolated on the same growth rate as that first 30 years?
We use the growth rate from 2050 to 2060 to extend 2070 and 2080. It's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So slide number 9, you did slide number 9?
Sorry?
Okay, so for slide number 9, we as a planning group, with regards to county, you gave us 2 scenarios. I believe you said we have to select from those 2 scenarios, whether it's 1 or half migration. Is that correct? For counties?
Yes, so the WUGs have already been drafted using the 1.0 scenario. If you would like to use the 0.5 instead, you'll need to develop those WUG level projections.
Okay, I'm getting confused here. With regards to the counties you said there's 2 migration scenarios, and I thought you said we would have to select either 1 or half. Or is that already done for us? Because I know I see that the WUG projections within WUG.
Right, so the county level projections are developed already. So you have 2 options at that level. But to get to the WUG level, there's only 1 scenario that has been drafted. So you would need to re-sub-allocate from the county level down to the WUG level if you want to go to 0.5.
Are there any other comments or
Mr. Taggart has a follow-up question.
Mr. Taggart?
I just wanted to, for clarification though, that the use of the 1.0 or the 0.5 has to be for the entire region It's not by individual WUG, is that correct?
So we have kind of a, as we always do in every planning cycle, we set a cap on the region. And I believe in regional, that's the 1.0. So you could use lower county level numbers if you wanted to do that. The WUG projections, we use the county kind of as a control on the WUG projections. So that's kind of the easiest path forward, is to look at a total county and then say, okay, well, you know, the sum of the WUGs in that county then meet that population number. So it's not exactly on a WUG level.
No, I guess what I'm trying to make clear, though, is that use of the 1.0 or 0.5 would be, and I understand that you have a control in terms of the cap on county, but if the Water Development Board doesn't want to see one WUG in a region use 1.0 and others use 0.5, or is that allowable? Or is that county by county, or is it the entire region, one or the other? I'd understood that it was one way or the other way for the entire region. I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that. There's a big difference, I think, in what numbers that may yield if we do it otherwise.
Sure, it's really county by county.
But it's still a zero-sum game for the county. Any population increase comes out of county other?
It's a regional cap. So you have that kind of total population within regional that you're gonna stay within. And then you can make the counties kind of fit within that, and then WUGs fit within the counties.
Thank you.
Katie, I have a question. What kind of supporting information would be necessary to use that flexibility, if any?
Sure. So at the county level, you know, we would really like to see, you know, we have historical growth rates at the county that came from the U.S. Census Bureau. So kind of future information. So it could be land use planning, you know, new subdivisions, plats, things like that, that are, or if you, you know, the opposite, building moratoriums where there won't be new building, you know, in the future, something like that, to then set kind of a control on your county level projections. And then the WUG level, once you've determined what projections to use at the county level, then the WUGs, again, kind of same information, so comprehensive plans, land use planning, you know, something that indicates that the WUG will grow at a future rate different than how it's been growing in the past.
So just to clarify, we would need to provide supporting information to shift within a county, or yeah.
Yeah, so something that indicates, yes, that the county or the WUG will grow at a different rate in the future than what we've been seeing in the past, and it's different than what the demographer thinks that growth will be.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
On slide 17, go to that. Does that projection assume the 1.0 migration?
Yes, it does. It aligns with the county projections that I showed, I think, on slide 10.
If there are no more questions or comments, we'll move to the next agenda item. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Move to agenda item 10, presentation by TWDB on the overlap between regional flood planning and regional water planning. Gronkowski?
Can y'all hear me? Good morning, everyone.
Can hear you, thank you.
Sure, and I apologize, I'm not sure why my video is on, but I'll proceed with that and try to figure it out. Good morning, everyone. I'm James Bronikowski at the Texas Water Development Board, and I'm the manager of the Regional Flood Planning Department. And today I'm here to talk about the Water Development Board's flood planning process and program, state and regional flood planning programs, and how they could, a summary of that and how it could interact and overlap with regional and state water planning programs. And so just a brief overview. I know many on this group, and this group itself is familiar with the Water Development Board, so I'll just briefly describe how everything fits together. As y'all know, the Water Development Board is comprised of three main components: science, planning, and financing. The science program helps build data, collect, compile, and analyze data, which fits into the planning program, which utilizes that data to plan for future needs, which goes forward to financing, ultimately with the goal of a secure water future for Texas in terms of water, flood, and wastewater. Now, the state and regional water planning programs have a long history with the state, going back to the 1950s. It's a tried and true program, and the state and regional flood programs are fairly new. These were created in 2019 after some major storm events in 2017 and 2018, including Hurricane Harvey. Those major events led the legislature to focus on these state and regional flood planning efforts, which led to the creation of these two programs. So now I'll give a brief update on these flood planning efforts and where we are to date. And so, as I mentioned, regional flood planning, this is the first of its kind statewide flood program. Nothing like this has been done so far in the state. A few years ago, the Water Development Board had put together what we called a state flood assessment. That was mostly an information gathering endeavor. However, what we're going through now with the regional flood planning process is a much more intensive effort. Through the legislative efforts, one of the main points of that was to set this up as a watershed-based planning regions, with all of the flood planning regions based on major river basins. Similar to regional water planning, this is a bottom-up approach, whereby the regions are comprised of, groups of local stakeholders, very similar to regional water planning. This is intended to be a transparent process with public input and a lot of volunteer members, similar to the makeup of this group. And as you can see, it was fairly competitive to get into this. We had a lot of responses to get into this initial makeup of flood planning group members. I will point out, you can see on this map on the right, Region L, because the flood planning regions are based on major river basins, they do not follow the county line boundaries as water planning does. And so the overlap with water planning, there are particularly three regions, flood planning regions that overlap with Region L. Those are the Region 11, Guadalupe, Region 12, San Antonio, and the northern portion of Region 13, Nueces. And so as I've been mentioning, and as y'all know, of course, regional water planning has a long history, and it's been a very successful program. And it was, from our interpretation, used as a model for regional and state flood planning programs. There are many similarities between the two. They both operate on 5-year cycles. As I mentioned, there is this regional representation to make up the regional flood planning groups. And they are comprised of the same interest category groups that the regional water planning groups are made up of, with one addition, and that is flood districts. However, there are some differences between the two. One of the main ones I mentioned is the boundaries of floodplain regions being based on major river basins. Another main difference is the significant amount of GIS, or Geographic Information System content, that the regional and state floodplain programs are requiring. As I mentioned, these are the same interest categories that comprise the voting members of the groups, as well as non-voting members from relevant state agencies. And similar to regional and state water planning, everything kind of fits together in a very similar way. The regional flood plans will be identifying, on a regional level, identifying the flood risk within communities and around communities, identifying needs and recommending what we're calling flood management evaluations, strategies, and flood mitigation projects. I'll briefly explain what those are. Flood mitigation projects are fairly straightforward. Those are projects intended to reduce flood risk and mitigate and help protect against the loss of life and property. Flood strategies are a more general term that are more general purpose and allow groups to come up with overall strategies to address flood risk that may not be specific or well-defined enough to be listed and fit as an actual flood mitigation project. The third category that I mentioned, flood management evaluations. This is a sort of a newer category of project type that can fit into the state and regional flood plans. And this came from recognizing that across the states, there are many levels of flood data available along the coast in heavily developed and also heavily developed communities. There can be a richness of flood data in those areas. On the flip side, there are many portions of West Texas and the Panhandle where there is just very sparse flood data. And so to help address those needs, a category was created called flood management evaluations, whereby specific flood studies and flood evaluations could be included in the plan so that those communities that do not have enough data available to formulate projects can still have something to put into plan to help get them on the path of identifying their flood risk, identifying and recommending mitigation projects to address those needs, and ultimately work to secure funding. And so similar to regional water planning, all of those regional flood plans will be combined and compiled into a state flood plan, which will rank all of the recommended projects and serve as a guide for state flood management. The next step in that is, as the state flood plan is developed, that will be utilized for future state financial assistance for flood projects. We've already, as I mentioned, the legislative session in 2019, in addition to the state and regional flood planning programs, there was what is called the Flood Infrastructure Fund that was created at that same time. About roughly $800 million was allocated to that fund, and the Water Development Board has been allocating and providing that funding to communities through grants and low interest loans to help mitigate and plan for flood risk. Once the state flood plan is adopted by the Water Development Board, at that point, any flood funding that the board commits or provides to communities will have to be for projects that are within the state flood plan. And so, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is intended to be a 5-year cycle to match water planning. They are slightly offset, so they do not occur at the same time. However, I will also note this first session of regional flood planning was a little truncated, and that was those were based on dates, statutory dates that we are required to follow. So, following the 2019 legislative session, The regional flood planning groups, their technical consultants, as well as Water Development Board staff, have been working hard and diligently to set up this program, set up these the 15 regional flood planning groups, work with them to select their consultants and get these flood plans developed and these initial round of flood plans developed in about 2.5 years. So about half the cycle time was available for this first round. Those first regional flood plans just came in about 3 weeks ago on January 10th, 2023. And so right now we are very much in the thick of reviewing those in the hopes of getting those to our board in the next couple months. Overall, the state flood plan is required by statute to be adopted by our board in September of 2024. So I've talked a lot about the overall structure of regional and state flood planning and how that relates to water planning. And so I want to dive just quickly a little deeper on what are the key tasks of regional flood planning. And I would say the main task involved there is identifying specific flood risk. This is a main component of the regional flood plans, one of the largest tasks. And it's really a three-part analysis. The first part of evaluating and analyzing flood risk is a flood hazard analysis. This is intended to determine the location and magnitude of flooding, and basically the spatial extent. So where is it flooding? How deep is it? This includes, as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of GIS-based data on this. This task here is definitely very heavily GIS-based. This is what helps produce a lot of flood hazard maps. And I'll take this time to note that this process, that the regional flood planning process, is not intended to be a regulatory process. Neither the Water Development Board or any of these 15 regional flood planning groups have any sort of regulatory authority. These maps and planning process are intended to be just that, a planning process to help both local communities, the region, neighboring communities, the region as a whole, as well as the state, get an idea and be able to evaluate flood risk across the state. What are the needs to address those flood risks? And so I mentioned the flood hazard analysis is mostly to determine the location, magnitude, and extent of flooding. The next component of that is the flood exposure analysis. So taking that location and extent of flooding, the next step is identifying and analyzing who might be harmed, what buildings, how many people are living in this flood hazard area, how many buildings are there critical facilities? Basically, it's that point. The purpose of flood exposure analysis will result in things like building counts, number of people, number of dollars potentially at damage based on the flood hazard that's been determined. The third component of this is a vulnerability analysis, and this is an analysis to help determine how those that are exposed to flood, how vulnerable are they to those floodings? That includes critical facilities, things such as social vulnerability indices. So here, the groups and the state are looking at, based on who is susceptible to flooding, how well are they able to, how vulnerable are they to those flood hazards? Other key tasks of the regional flood planning program, and these mirror a lot what's going on in regional water planning, setting goals, identifying projects and strategies to address needs, as well as recommending projects. There are also similar sections dealing with legislative, administrative, and regulatory recommendations. So there's a lot of similar other chapters and tasks as well to water planning. And so, as I mentioned, there's a lot of GIS data applicable to flooding, and to help the groups, the regional flood planning groups, get off the ground and develop their initial regional flood plans. The Water Development Board helped compile and collect a lot of source data that's already out there from many different sources. These sources came from other state and federal agencies, as well as local communities, and they really tried to tie together academics as well, and tried to tie together a lot of existing information that's out there. And so this was something I feel, and I think others really helped the groups get off the ground and collect data, so we're not starting from nothing. Here's just another example of the type of data. As you can see, there's information on locations for some critical infrastructure, such as fire stations, hospitals, schools. And so this sort of data was very helpful for the groups to determine, after they determined the extent of flooding, helping identify who might be in harm's way. And so next, I just want to cover a few items that from regional flood planning process that are relevant to the regional water planning. The first one I'll mention is the use of population projections from the state water plan. Within statute and our rules, the regional flood planning is required within our future conditions planning and analysis. That is required to be consistent with the population projections in the state water plan. I will note that because of the spatial analysis and the difficulty in determining where these increases in population might go, are they in the floodplain? Are they out of the floodplain? It's another level of complexity. So it may not look exactly the same in our use of population projections in regional flood planning. However, overall, the big picture, it must be consistent with projections in the state water plan. As I mentioned, we also have a chapter devoted, it's our task six, chapter 6, devoted to analyzing and reporting on the impacts or effects that the regional flood plan or projects within it may have on the state water plan. I will say, as I'll get to in a minute, on some of these guidance principles, the regional water plans are required to not have any negative effect on water supply or water availability or water quality. However, they can have a positive impact. One of the required analysis components from statute was that for each of the flood mitigation projects recommended by the regional flood planning groups, there was to be an analysis included on that of whether or not that particular flood project could contribute to water supply in the area. And so that is a component, an analysis component of all recommended projects to see whether or not they have any sort of water supply component. And so I was mentioning the guidance principles. These guidance principles are set in rule, and these are considerations that each of the regional flood planning groups must consider when developing their regional flood plans. There's about 34 of these, and I've listed here some that are relevant to water planning. As I mentioned, contributing to water supply development whenever available. The groups must follow all of the regional and state water planning guidance principles. Considering the benefits to flood mitigation strategies to water quality. There's also requirements that anything in the regional flood plans, any development, flood detention, or excess capacity all existing water right laws must be, those projects must be consistent and in accordance with all existing water rights laws. So that's definitely a consideration as some of these projects look at potentially capturing and utilizing water supply from floodwaters. And also, lastly, anything in the regional flood plan shall not cause long-term impairment to designated water quality, as identified in the state water quality management plan. So as you can see, there are several components of the regional regional flood plan that require it to be consistent with regional and state water planning. And so next I was going to just go over some of the results or data that we've compiled from the draft regional flood plans that were submitted late last summer. As I mentioned, the final plans just came in a few weeks ago, but we have not had a chance to compile and analyze all that data in time to make it into this presentation. And so I won't spend too much time on these slides. Y'all have these for a record, but I wanted to include them so y'all have this information. As I mentioned earlier, Region L overlaps with mostly 3 floodplain regions, regions 11, 12, and 13. 11 Guadalupe, 12 San Antonio, and 13 Nueces. And so I've included a couple slides here just to give y'all some basic information on the these floodplain regions, their area, number of claims, and some contact information. Also wanted to give y'all some examples of the types of visual data and that these groups are collecting. And one thing I'll say is this is still very much in development, I'll say, but working towards once the state floodplain is developed, a state floodplain viewer, which we anticipate all this information to be available online and access there. I know these sometimes printed maps do not capture all of the detail, the level of detail, but just know that there is there's GIS data underlying all of this that will be made available to the public. And so this map shot here is showing the existing infrastructure, existing flood-related infrastructure, excuse me, across Region 11. So it gives you kind of an idea of the type of data that is being collected in terms of locating existing flood infrastructure, low water crossings, things of that nature. Again, Region 12, San Antonio is also has a large area within Region L. I've included there some statistics and information for them here as well. So feel free to go back and utilize this information in the slides if y'all need to contact anyone on these groups. Again, just another example showing the type of, and I apologize, this says existing infrastructure at the top, but this should be existing exposure and hazard. And this is showing the extent of different areas based on previous information. Where are low water crossings, basically areas of need, of flood risk need within Region 12. And lastly, Region 13, Region L covers a part of this northern portion, upstream portion, so I've included them as well. And here's another visualization showing flood risk as a whole. This was the groups sort of combining all of the information from flood hazard, exposure, and vulnerability to create sort of a heat map identifying the areas of highest flood risk. And so that helped them determine the areas of greatest need and where to focus their attention on goals and recommending projects. And lastly here, on this section, I want to cover just to give you all a few examples of statewide summary data. This is across the state, all of the existing condition flood hazard area. As you can see, Texas is roughly 268,000 square miles, and roughly 68,000 of that is within a flood hazard area related to either the 1% annual chance flood, which is commonly referred to as a 100-year storm event, and the 0.2% annual chance flood event, which is commonly referred to as a 500-year storm event. You also see some purple unknowns on the top of some of these. One of the tasks involved with identifying the flood hazards was a public input component. So there were public meetings held where members of the public could come by and see the draft flood hazard maps prepared by the region and help provide input on accuracy and potential corrections to those maps. They could help identify where flooding might be located that they're familiar with that is not captured on that map. And so that was, as I mentioned earlier, a transparent process. That was very much a valuable insights that were gathered from local community members in terms of where are the specific local flood hazards that may not be captured by these modeling analysis. This here is just a short graph showing the count of buildings approximately at risk of flooding. Statewide, there's roughly over 1.7 million. As you can see, it kind of, I know you may not know some of these regions offhand, but the higher bands do sort of seem to correspond with the more heavily developed communities or regions in many cases. And this slide here shows a summary of from the draft plan, the potential cost, total cost of all of the recommended strategies, projects, and evaluations. It looks like Region 6 is very much skewing this graph. There's one Corps of Engineers project that's included in there that's really, I'd say the majority of that is really lifting this up. I believe it's over $20 million for that one project. Sorry, not 20 million, 2 billion. Sorry, 20 billion, sorry. Numbers are a little off there, 20 billion. And so that really makes that one look a lot higher. And so I've talked a lot about the makeup of the regional flood planning groups, how they interact potentially with regional water planning. And that really leads to how can this group or the communities that y'all represent and interest categories that y'all represent become involved. The first step I would say is to know your region and visit their website. On the Water Development Board website, we have a handy locator tool where you can type in your address and it will show you which region, flood planning region, you're located within, and provide links to their website so you can access more contact information, access their meeting schedules, and hopefully become involved as much as you're able to. And so how can you be involved? Show up to the meetings. Many of these are providing hybrid meetings in terms of in-person and virtual options. You can submit information to them, review their plans, and as well as provide public comments and public input. I would say that collaboration is very important on this, and with regional flood planning being a relatively new endeavor, outreach and public participation is something that we would like to grow for this program. In terms of what is needed from local communities, one of the things I mentioned, I alluded to earlier, was helping to validate local flood risk information. Local communities, people that live in the area, y'all are the best representatives and are in the best position to help identify where is it flooding within your region. And so we're asking you to help and work with your regional groups to help make sure that those flood risk areas are accurately captured. You can also provide information about potential flood mitigation projects that are in need of the community. There was, as part of this first cycle, there was the consultants did a lot of outreach efforts with local communities to help gather and build and identify that list of potential projects. However, we realize this is an ongoing process. And so additional participation from communities will really help build out that list and help help identify and show what the actual need is in terms of projects and cost. And of course, just any other input on the plans throughout their development. On this page, I've included a few links that y'all can utilize. Our main flood planning website, information on the planning groups, as well as the regional flood planning group locator that I mentioned, and I believe this is a screenshot of it. And so lastly, I just want to close with just a summary of the flood infrastructure needs. I mentioned earlier at the beginning of this that in addition to the state and regional flood planning programs, there was what is called the Flood Infrastructure Fund was set up in 2019. It was over roughly around 800 million was allocated to the Flood Infrastructure Fund, and to apply to that fund, we received over 280 applications with a funding need of over $2.3 billion. So that was utilized. That roughly 800 million was utilized to help meet some of these needs. But as you can see, the need is many times greater than what has been historically or previously been available. These funds can be utilized not only on their own, but there were many communities that utilized the flood infrastructure funds to help leverage federal match money. There were several FEMA projects that were where the federal government was providing either 75% or more funds for a project, but they were requiring a local match portion. And so these state flood infrastructure funds were and can be utilized in that instance to help make up that local match portion, so that many of those projects that were waiting on and unable to come up with local match portions were able to access these funds and get those projects moving. And so, as I mentioned, what we've compiled so far from the draft regional flood plans, there's over 200 projects at roughly over $37 billion. And in terms of study amounts, there's roughly over 2,000 of those with a funding need of over $1.7 billion. And lastly, I just want to touch on some ongoing collaboration. We recognize that there are many agencies and groups working to improve and reduce flood risk across Texas. We work closely with the General Land Office, the Corps, and other state and federal agencies, and a few academic institutions to help get these programs much more developed, and just with data sharing and making sure we can provide as much as possible to the regional flood planning groups as they develop their regional plans. And that's it. And I'll open to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bronkowski. Just a few comments, and then we'll see if there are other comments and questions. One, I think PWDB and the members of the flood planning group should congratulate you for putting together the plan in such short order and in such detail. So, yeah, good job on that, for certain. My only question has to do with this. Earlier in your slide presentation, you identified one of the guiding principles as being to try to contribute. This process should try to contribute to the development of water supplies. Can you think of an example, in particular, one that might fall within Region L, where a flood mitigation project or strategy would actually contribute to the development of supplies in our region?
Sure, I can provide a little more information on that. I will say on this first round of planning, there were not any projects that I'm aware of, and I checked this, yesterday, there were not any projects within Region L that are identified as contributing to water supply. And I will say, I will elaborate on that and say there a few different ways that a project can be considered to be contributing to water supply in the regional flood plans. It could be directly contributing to water supply to a identified water user group with an identified need. That is the best possible, or I guess most direct possible scenario. Something like that could, would be capturing excess floodwaters and potentially treating and/or storing those for future use. There's on the more indirect side or indirect level of contributing to water supply. We are also asking for projects that may be just capturing stormwater and to allow for greater groundwater recharge. We're asking for those projects to be identified as well. So there's direct and indirect contributions. Excuse me. But one of the components is we're asking them to, especially in those direct cases, to be able to tie that potential water supply to a water user group with a specific need.
Very good. Thank you. That addressed my question. Are there any other comments or questions by the members? Well, I'm sure this will develop over time and our interest may grow. We may invite you back in the future to meetings to give us a progress update from time to time.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and feel free to invite me back at any time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It's 11:16. Acceptable to the group. Let's take a 5-minute break here, recess and reconvene at 11:21.
Angela, you didn't want to talk about region 12?
What's that? No, I'm okay, thanks. James really takes care of it. You wanted a platform to talk about the plan, huh? That's Thursday, right? Yeah, task 12.
Task 12, yeah, that's been ours.
Yeah, exactly, because you're adding however many new projects.
Yeah, we were talking to Reed last week, and she goes, I think that number is way low. She goes, what do you think? Like, ours are gonna quadruple with more over the past 12 because
Because the cost of evaluation is so much lower than the cost of the project.
Yeah, we got jumped on like FMVs that we're going to for you. Yeah, we might have to.
No. I always have to tell us your space when we're hot on the mic.
Well, yeah. We're idiots.
In the Austin.
Yeah. So, 20 minutes.
Unless you have something really pressing. Maybe you have an example for me.
I do. We have two actually. They're not enough for me.
And what about?
We have a on-site.
You guys know where you're to me, that's good. Seems to be perfect. This discussion.
Wasn't down trees in my house for this ice. My brother's in the rainwater area, he can't figure issues. Not more than what we do. I'll probably. I'm not so afraid. It's just far enough south. It's never got too bad, but it's enough of some of the trees. I don't like that. The afternoon is gonna be.
Yeah.
Right now, my driveway seems to do it.
Let's take some of them on, but.
Some people I recognize in that area are not here. A little bit more drive and had to go to more of the ice.
They're still on the streaming edges to the west.
Oh, it's I was talking to some of the peers up there.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm with the ground, Jimmy, I'm on the groundwater district. Cow Creek, but I'm not representing
Absolutely.
Oh, the water committee, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, are we still live on the?
Yes.
Very good. Yeah, let's take our seats.
Tim, this is Diane Wasenick. I wanted to mention that I have been in communication with Vanessa, who is not here today. Y'all may have heard parts of Austin are not travelable because of all the trees that fell down. And she has not had power for 2 days, I think. And so that's why she is not in attendance.
Thank you, Diane. We hope she gets the power back very soon. On that damage. Okay, we'll pick up where we left off. Meeting's back in session here. Let's move to agenda item 11, presentation by technical consultant regarding schedule and progress updates. Lauren, are you making a presentation?
Yes, ma'am, I am. Or yes, sir, I am. Oops. Are you able to hear me and see my screen?
We are.
Great. All right. So this first agenda item is focusing just on the schedule and any progress updates. So here's the overall conceptual schedule for the 5-year cycle. We have the 5 years along the top here, subdivided by quarter, and the major tasks and activities for planned development are shown on the left-hand side of the screen. The schedule has been updated based on the Texas Water Development Board's revised conceptual schedule released earlier this month in January 20, or actually, I guess earlier in this year in January of 2023. Their schedule includes tasks that were funded in the initial scope of work, and they are shaded in dark blue. And Black & Veatch has added anticipated activities and their associated schedules in this lighter blue color. Texas Water Development Board data releases are shown here in green flags, and then deadlines from the Texas Water Development Board are shown in red flags. And the major deadlines to note are the technical memorandum due in March of 2024, the initially prepared plan due in March of 2025, and then the final plan due in October of 2025. This yellow highlight right here shows where we are. The major items to note are that we have a few activities that are carried forward from 2022 into 2023, including the Task 2 population and water demands projections, and of course this Task 10, the public participation and plan adoption. Also to note is that our schedule is in an upward momentum where we will be having more concurrent activities and tasks. So from now until the initially prepared plan is due in March of 2025, we're going to be busy and juggling lots of different tasks simultaneously. And on the next slide, what we'll do is we'll zoom in on just the 2023 anticipated Region L schedule. And so this schedule is just for this year, and it's subdivided by quarter and then also by month. And we also have the activities and tasks over here on the left-hand side. The anticipated Region L activities are shown in this navy blue color, and we have any other activities shown in royal blue, such as the legislative session expected to go through May, and then the regional water planning rules updates, which would happen sometime in August, later this year generally. So we have Task 1, which will start on later this year. Task 2A, which is the non-municipal water demand projections. Texas Water Development Board have provided a deadline of July 14th of this year to provide feedback on the draft projections. And in the subsequent agenda item, we'll discuss those recommendations on providing feedback to the Texas Water Development Board on non-municipal demands. Task 2B, as Katie Dahlberg mentioned, the Texas Water Development Board has released the population and municipal demand projections, and we have until August 11th to provide comments and feedback on those. And so that's what we'll be working on quite a bit over the next coming months. And then later on, we anticipate having amending our contract with the San Antonio River Authority in the coming weeks and months so that we can start working on the items in the amended scope of work, which are shown in red. So we anticipate working on tasks 3, 4A, 4B, 5, and 7, starting in Q2 or later this year. Are there any questions about the schedule before I move on? Okay, so as I mentioned, the Texas Water Development Board released the Region L draft municipal demand projections and population, and we've have this QR code right here that will take you to the Texas Water Development Board's projections and their methodology, and they have a nice dashboard there to enable you to look a little bit closer at any WUGs that you have a particular interest in. Just a quick update on completed efforts to date. So we sent out a survey to water user groups to request updated contact information. And we received 39 responses from 34 unique WUGs, and several of those, the vast majority, expressed interest in attending a virtual webinar to learn more about the planning process, which I'll talk about in the following slide. And then several more respondents requested to be included on the Region L mailing list. The Population and Water Demands Work Group met several times over the last few months to review the non-municipal demand projections and have prepared recommendations to you all, the Regional Water Planning Group, for today's meeting, which we'll talk about in the subsequent agenda. Now, going forward, the ongoing efforts that we're doing, we are developing a webinar for stakeholders so that we can introduce the regional water planning process and detail how to provide input during the planning process, and that's anticipated sometime during this quarter of 2023. And then we are also going to send out a survey to water user groups, providing them their draft population and water demands projections, and requesting any feedback on that. And that will also be anticipated for this first quarter of 2023. And then the population and water demands work group will likely meet sometime in March of 2023 or late February of 2023 to review the draft population and municipal demand projections that were released by the board in January. And then we're also beginning interregional coordination efforts, coordinating with Region K, Region N, and Region P to discuss any shared WUGs that have boundaries that extend beyond Region L, or that are shared with these neighboring regions. And that concludes this agenda item. Are there any questions about the schedule and activities before we move on to the recommendations on the non-municipal water demands projections?
Okay, there being no questions, let's move forward to next agenda. Well.
Okay. Okay. So just wanted to briefly, moving on to that agenda item 12, I wanted to briefly give an overview of where we've been to date. So about a year ago, on February 16th of 2022, the Regional Water Planning Group established the Population and Water Demands Work Group, abbreviated PWD here. We had a meeting where we did a high-level review of the data that had been released to date at that point, and that was in April of 2022, and we reviewed the livestock manufacturing and steam electric demands. And then we also met on November 30th, December 8th, December 13th, and January 19th to do a more detailed review of all these different demand projections, where we took homework home and we did additional research, reached out to stakeholders and WUGs, brought subject matter experts to the table to review the data and make sure that it is as accurate as possible. And so the Population and Water Demands Work Group met on January 19th of this year to review, develop, and finalize recommendations for all of the non-municipal water use categories. And today, here we are presenting the Population Water Demands Work Group is providing those recommendations to you all regarding feedback to the Texas Water Development Board. So in summary, the categories of water use are shown on the left-hand side: livestock, manufacturing, irrigation, steam electric, and mining. And the summary of those recommendations are shown here in this table. So for livestock, the previous projections were based on a 5-year average as the baseline for all of Region L. And so the Population and Water Demands Work Group recommends revising those projections to include a 10-year average baseline instead. For manufacturing, the projections for all counties except for Comal, Guadalupe, and Victoria counties have no proposed revisions. For Comal, Guadalupe, and Victoria counties, there were some minor revisions that are recommended that are based on information received about specific entities, so specific manufacturing users. For irrigation, similar to livestock, instead of a 5-year average baseline, instead the Population and Water Demands Work Group is recommending to revise the projections according to a 10-year average baseline. And for steam electric and for mining, there are no revisions proposed at this time. However, since the Population and Water Demands Work Group met on January 19th, we've received new information for Guadalupe and Bexar counties that they have not had an opportunity to review yet. And it was understood that at the time when the recommendations were being made by the Population and Water Demands Work Group, that there were no revisions that were proposed at this time. However, we have until July of 2023 to provide feedback to the Texas Water Development Board. So we have one last time, essentially in May, to review any proposed recommendations on steam electric or mining or any other categories should new information come in, and can make a recommendation to provide feedback based on updated information at that time. So I anticipate that the Population and Water Demands Work Group will review the data provided for Guadalupe and Bexar counties at a later date, and then provide an updated recommendation to you all on the steam electric category. Are there any questions on that before I go into a bit more detail on each of these?
Yeah, Lauren, real quick, before you go into has that committee identified a date that it's going to meet and review this recently transmitted information?
Not yet. When we talked about meeting to talk about the population and municipal demand projections, we were talking about maybe late February or early March. And so it's possible that we could combine those discussions in the same meeting. I haven't talked to San Antonio River Authority about that possibility yet, or to the chair, Humberto Ramos, about that yet, but that is a possibility.
Lauren, the reasoning behind the livestock and irrigation average tip increasing from 5 to 10 years, is that y'all's recommendation to get a broader perspective of the water use at the time for those periods?
Yes, sir. And the following slides go into that a slightly bit more detail, and I can explain that. And then if you have any other questions about it, you're feel free to check out the regionltexas.org website, because we prepared lots of backup information and presentation on these different demand projections. And so, yeah, you can check those out there.
Lauren, this is Ryan Bale with Limited Generation, and just throwing this out there, we as a company are anticipating something to come out of this legislative session based on things that have been said by Governor Abbott and others, that there's going to be a push for additional generation capacity in the state, mainly as a response, as we all know, to Winter Storm Uri in 21. So I don't know how, obviously this is something that is very early in the process, but, just, and I'm sure you're probably aware, but something to look forward to in a planning process, that there could be a potential push to build new generation in the state somewhere. I'm not going to say it's going to be in this region or what region it will be in, but there is definitely a lot of interest in that topic.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to Region L. I'm very excited to work with you, and we'll definitely be in touch on the steam electric demands in the future. I think we'll be able to look at the luminance demands in a bit more detail, and hopefully provide some information to the Population and Water Demands Work Group on all of that in the coming months. So going back to the question that was asked earlier about the draft water demand projections for livestock. So originally the baseline was based on a 5-year average, which was 2015 through 2019. And the 2015 through 2019, as many of you know, was not a particularly dry year or dry period of time. However, the 2010 to 2019 time period is inclusive of the extraordinary drought that happened in 2011. And the historical data that's shown here in 2010 through 2019, as you can see, it was very high in 2010 and 2011, and then dropped off in 2012. And that drop off, that decrease, represents the sell-off that occurred in livestock as a result of the drought. And so this 10-year average is incorporating all of these complex and interacting variables that we believe is just generally more representative of water demands. And so we, based on this 10-year baseline, the proposed or recommended Region L water demands would be 24,639 acre feet. And that is actually very closely aligned with the 5-year average, which is the 2015 through 2019, which was initially proposed by the Texas Water Development Board, which was the 23,449 acre feet per year. Now, these demands are still lower than the previous regional water plan, which projected them at 31,504 acre feet per year. However, this is what the Population and Water Demands Work Group is recommending. And with that recommendation, this would be the demands for each county for each decade from 2030 to 2080. So the recommendation from the Population and Water Demands Work Group is to revise the projections according to a 10-year average baseline, 2010 through 2019, instead of the 5-year average. And this is slide 1 of 2. And this is the second one with the remaining categories.
Lauren, go back a slide. The biggest impact is the sell-off that occurred after the 2020. But both, whether you use 5 or 10 years, inconsequential. It's really a big difference in seeing that water use hasn't gone back to what it was pre-2011, and just recognizing this lower level of your Go back, Lauren, your 2 slides.
I can't, did you say go back to the previous slide?
Slide 11. There you go, right there. The fundamental issue here was it's not using that 31,000 number because that was a population much bigger than today. You see, it's never recovered. And that's really the bigger issue rather than 5 to 10-year average. The 10-year average is a little bit more conservative.
I'm sorry, the audio quality is, it's hard to hear. Did you ask a question?
Lauren, this is Steve Graham. I was just explaining as a work group member what I thought was going on here and why the 10-year new average is why we were recommending that. Just conversation, no question.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, let's move forward.
Okay. For manufacturing, there were 3 revisions that are being recommended by the Population and Water Demands Work Group. The first is for Comal County, and it's related to the CEMEX Balcones Quarry. Basically, there was a data that was included under manufacturing when in fact it should have been under the mining category instead. And so with the adjustment, the adjusted demand projections for Comal County are shown in this table here. And then for Guadalupe County, there was the Odo J. Rydell Regional Reclamation Plant that was included under Guadalupe County's manufacturing demands, but they are a wastewater treatment facility that were under construction during the period of time that they were included. And so the work group and the work group recommends removal of that facility from the historical use, which would adjust the future projections downward. The Texas Water Development Board supports that as well. And then the third revision is to the Victoria County manufacturing demand numbers. So essentially, Invista's historical water use estimates were lower than, their own water use estimates were greater than the Texas Water Development Board's water use survey. And so the Victoria County demands are adjusted upward to incorporate that historical water use. And so the resulting manufacturing demands are shown here. Again, the only revisions that are being recommended for manufacturing demands are to Comal, Guadalupe, and Victoria counties. Are there any questions on manufacturing?
I don't have a question, Lauren. I just have a statement.
Yes,
one of the things we did as a subcommittee was, we had concerns, individual concerns, and some of these members of the committee went out and tried to find these answers. And that's pretty much where we got some of these answers, revisions. They reached out to individual, based on the networking opportunity, reached out to individual entities to see what the numbers were correct. That's how we were able to change some of these. We just really any change. We actually went back and did some of the homework, and that's what some of these some of our members did. So full disclosure, we did do that. It was effective, I thought. Sorry, just a comment.
Thanks, Humberto. Moving on to irrigation demands. The Population and Water Demands Work Group considered various irrigation demand baseline options. The initial option, option A, is the one that was recommended by the Texas Water Development Board. And it was, that was initially proposed by the Texas Water Development Board, and it's based on the 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. The previous regional water plan was based on a 5-year average from 2010 to 2014. And the recommendation from the planning group was to pursue option C, which is a 10-year average of the Texas Water Development Board water use estimates from 2010 through 2019. Now, we also looked at 2 other options that would exclude outliers like the wettest year and then the wettest and the driest years. But for brevity purposes, I won't go into detail on those. So the Population and Water Demands Work Group also recommended no change to the Texas Water Development Board's projection methodology and proposed to keep the irrigation projections flat, consistent from 2030 to 2080. And so these were those 5 options that were considered and reviewed. Option A is the 5-year average from 2015 to 2019. And this was what was originally proposed by the Texas Water Development Board. This was the lowest of the options that was baseline options that were considered. And then we have option B, which is the 5-year average from the previous plan, so 2010 to 2014, and it was the highest that was considered. And for reference, by the way, the option A is 270,000 acre feet versus option B is 359,000 acre feet. Shown here in black are the actual historical water use estimates in acre feet. So you can see it increases, the decreases, and this is why we looked at removing any potential outliers in 2015 and 2011. Ultimately, the option C, this 10-year average, prevailed mainly because it is the most reasonable, and it takes into account, again, the variety of factors, variables that are overlapping, and takes into account the swings of very dry years in 2011 and then very wet years in 2015. And so, yeah, the option C is what was recommended, and option C is the 314,000 acre feet per year. And so the recommendation from the planning, sorry, go ahead.
Can you go back? I was just going to add narrative to what you said. Can you go back a slide? Yeah. So option C is what we're recommending. You can see it really averages pretty well. The A and B options that the state had, they swing too much because of the 5-year outlook. They're heavily influenced by either drought or wet year. So again, the 10-year gives you a better overall estimation. That way we're not having dramatic increase or decreases in the pumping in those 5-year windows. It's just more natural, I guess. So we think it's intuitive. I hope you all agree.
Thanks, Steve. So the planning group recommends to revise the projections according to a 10-year average baseline from 2010 through 2019 instead of a 5-year average. And here is slide 1 of 2 for the county irrigation demands. Here's the second slide. Are there any questions about irrigation before I move on to steam electric? So moving on to steam electric demands, there were no revisions that were recommended by the Population and Water Demands Work Group based on information that we had received to date. However, as I mentioned, we did receive new information for Bexar and Guadalupe counties after the Population and Water Demands Work Group met on January 19th. And so I anticipate that we will bring that information to the Population and Water Demands Work Group for their consideration review and potentially develop a recommendation for you all at the May meeting. And that is slide 2 of 2 for the steam electric demands.
Lauren, on this one here, we specifically didn't make a recommendation because we wanted to defer to the new member, Mr. Bale. And I'm glad he gave input today for that exact reason. We thought that stakeholder member should have say so on this recommendation. So we look forward to his engagement on this particular projection.
Thank you. And moving on to mining demands, there were no revisions were recommended by the Population and Water Demands Work Group for the mining demands. The mining demands were developed by the Texas Water Development Board as part of a multi-year mining water use study in collaboration with the University of Texas Bureau of Economic Geology and the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS. And the demands were, and the data that they used to develop those demands were very in-depth, and there were no revisions that seemed to be necessary for these. So it's 1 of 2. So in summary, the recommendation for feedback to the Texas Water Development Board regarding non-municipal demand projections is summarized in this table. For livestock, recommending a 10-year average baseline. For manufacturing, revisions to 3 counties. For irrigation, revision of the 10-year average baseline. Are there any questions?
Lauren, again, just on the steam electric, The work group didn't see any reason for change, but I guess especially in light of what we heard from Mr. Bale, it might be worth seeing if the new ERCOT rules might affect that capacity and the water needs of that particular projection. So this recommendation could change on that one item if we see something different from the steam electric criteria.
Yes, sir. And in addition, in case we, in addition, the updated data and information that we received for Guadalupe and Bexar County, that would also result in a revision to steam electric demands that would be considered at the May meeting.
Can I ask one quick question? Lauren, just for a clarification, building off what Steve said, I guess to clarify on all these user groups for the projections is it's for existing entities, right? Because we remember that was the conversation we had with manufacturing. We weren't projecting growth on unknown entities yet. So similar with steam electric, would it be just growth from the existing power generation stations in the basin and whether or not they are looking to expand themselves, not necessarily a new plant?
Right, or this new state criteria requires a higher number of capacity or something like that, yes.
Affecting the existing?
Yes.
Gotcha, okay.
So the steam electric methodology wasn't just based on the historical users. It was also based on any proposed new facilities. And then, yeah, so steam electric, the methodology is slightly different than manufacturing.
Did we have proposed new? Whatever you're going to say for Bexar and Guadalupe?
I think we did, not for Bexar and Guadalupe. For Bexar and Guadalupe, it was that we received some updated information from CPS Energy about their projections. Yeah, so, but I believe there are new proposed facilities in the lower basin, I think in Victoria County.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lauren, can you expound on the previous plan? One of the questions was always asked is, are these unmet needs, you know, with regards to these revisions? And so right now we're making these recommendations for revisions, and with regards to non-municipal water demand, we can have unmet needs in the plan, correct?
Right. It is permissible by the board to have unmet needs for non-municipal demands. Of course, it's preferred not to, but we did have unmet needs in the previous plan for steam electric in Victoria County. I believe it was just for the 2020 decade, though.
I guess my point about that is at the end of this process, we're all not surprised that we made revisions on February 2nd, and at the end of the plan, there's four non-municipal demands that are unmet needs. We all understand that potentially these can be unmet. You know, what's clear is municipal demands need to have a met need. That's what's very important. So these changes we're making, again, or one development board allows us to occur with unmet needs for these particular items here. So at the end of the day, end of the plan, we may just have.
Well, at least with the irrigation, I know that unmet need dropped quite a bit. But it would still have an overall unmet need in the plan. It'd just be less than it was last cycle.
That's, I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think you're pointing out an important impact or downstream consequence of these decisions of developing these non-municipal water demand projections, which is that if the water demand projections are revised upward or downward, there could be either met or unmet needs when we get further down the line. But just in terms of how this process was carried out by the Population Water Demands Work Group, it was done in a fairly, I believe, in an objective way that wasn't looking at the impacts of unmet needs per se, but was really just trying to develop the most accurate demands based on historical and projected use, depending on the methodology that was provided to us by the board.
Is there any,
Mr. Taggart has a question.
Mr. Taggart? Speak up.
I guess I have more of a procedural question. In relation to today's actions, and given the fact that Steam Electric obviously, is still needing some additional review that we may tackle in conjunction with the municipal review by the committee, is it better to take action on all those items here, livestock, manufacturing, irrigation, and mining, today in relation to the recommendation, and then just leave the Steam Electric item for the next quarterly meeting? Like that, at least let us get past, the majority of these, rather than waiting till the last opportunity to act on that.
Good point. What's the pleasure of committee members? Would you like to proceed and give consideration to your recommended changes or feedback regarding changes to TWDB? I think we've been encouraged to supply that as soon as possible by TWDB. We want to hold the whole matter until a future meeting.
I'm in support of that amendment as described.
So am I. It makes sense. And our commitment is to get this Steam Electric, resolved by February, March. That would be
Is there any more discussion on the matter? And if not, is there a motion to be offered by a member?
I'll make a motion to accept these recommendations on livestock manufacturing, irrigation, and mining at this time. For that recommendations from the work group to the full planning group.
Second.
And that's, you're seeking authorization for technical consultants to submit those comments?
Yes.
We have a motion, we have a second as well. Is there any additional discussion on the matter? There is none. Is there any opposition to the motion? There being no opposition, the motion passes by consensus. Is that all we have to discuss under that agenda item? I believe it is. We'll move to agenda item 13, standing agenda item regarding additional subcommittees. Are there any members at this time that want to identify or request the formation of additional subcommittees to discuss topics that aren't already planned to be dealt with by previously established subcommittees? Okay. No discussion on that matter. We'll move to agenda item 14 regarding the next meeting. Okay, when is our next meeting scheduled? May 4th. Okay, so our next meeting scheduled for May 4th, subcommittee on projections will meet prior to that. Is there any discussion or comments regarding agenda items for the next meeting? Okay, there being, if you develop any comments or questions regarding that in coming months, contact one of us and we'll deal with that. That meeting's being planned. We'll move to agenda item 15, public comment. Is there anyone that would like to present comments at this time? Hearing none, we'll move to agenda item 16 to adjourn. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Second. Hearing no opposition, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
Now,